All right, welcome everyone to the Agile Project Management Workshop today. Great to have you all. I'm excited to run this again and digging into this. Why the workshop? Well, I think a lot of managers, coordinators, everybody, engineers as well, can feel a lot like the people in this picture. A lot of chaos. We got a lot of tools and dashboards, reports, inputs from clients, from sales, there's technicians, there are tickets coming in, there's emails, there's alerts, a lot of chaos. So even though we got the best dashboards and tools, still feel overwhelmed and burnt out. And a lot of us can feel like an accidental project manager where we kind of got voluntold into it, but don't have the skills, the tools, the process for it. So hence this is mindset, some tactical training, strategies, mindset, and methods for this. All right. Hope you had a bit of a refreshing break there. I'm going to kick things off and introduce our next speaker, who is Steve Psaradellis, also from Australia. Welcome, Steve. So Steve's been around for a long time, working on mainframes, which I've never touched, teaching engineers and techs, running an MSP, and now doing large projects under TEBA. I'm not sure how you prefer to pronounce it there, Steve, and with medium large organization in Australia. So like me, just had the need to improve project delivery and getting things done on time and on budget. And so he dug into Agile, Critical Chain, DevOps, other things, probably a lot deeper than I have, and created his own methodology, which he's calling ProOps. And so he's been on top left for 4 years or 5 years now. I lose track, Steve. And he loves to help other MSPs, other project teams as well with project delivery. So welcome, Steve. Great to have you here again.
Hey, Wim. Always a pleasure.
And so I will hand it off to you. You can share your screen.
Thanks very much. So g'day, everyone. Today we'll be talking about making projects profitable. Now, with the last session, look, with Melvin's presentation, if you were to re-watch that once a month, you would still find something new to actually do in your organization. I actually suggest you watch it once a month. I was taking notes, and I've seen him present before, right? So I've got a little to-do list to get to after this meeting. So making projects profitable. So today we're going to cover how to run a project team with regards to making projects profitable. And this is really aimed at people that run projects that run up to 2 or 3 months, and typically have project teams that do infrastructure type projects. This is not aimed if you're doing software development and things like that. That's sort of separate, but that's what we're going to cover today. Now, if you're doing projects that are larger than 3 months, you're doing larger projects, there are a few additional things that I would suggest you do. We're not going to have time to cover those today, but at TEBA here, we actually do both types of projects, smaller ones and larger ones. So the things we'll cover today cover both, but I'm just saying there are some additional tools and methodologies if you're going to do the big stuff. So here's some questions to ask yourself. Are you struggling to get projects finished on time, right? Are things taking longer than they should? Are things dragging on? Do project budgets overrun? In other words, you may quote a client an amount of time or a physical budget to do a project, and somehow it tends to cost you more to do that project, and you have to wear that. And finally, do projects suffer from scope creep? So you set out to do something for a client, and then by the time you finish, you end up doing a whole lot more work that wasn't planned for. And again, you end up paying for that. So if you answer yes to any of these, then keep listening. Thanks. So those are the 3 questions. So quite a few years ago, this was our performance on projects. So we were averaging 130% overrun, or 30% overrun on our projects, which means, let's say we quoted, just a round number, $100,000 to do a project. It was costing us on average $130,000 to do that project. So projects were consistently going over budget. And guess what? They were going over time as well. And of course, there was scope creep in there also. So this is the opposite of profitable projects. This is where we were quite a few years ago. So what do we do about it? So today we're going to have a look at how to finish projects or more projects on time, how to keep the projects in budget and in scope. And finally, this is an important one, and Melvin touched on a few of these points earlier. How do you protect your people from burning out, or your best people at least from burning out on projects, which we see happens a lot? So first one, how to finish more projects on time. Multitasking can kill project timelines. Let me be specific. So you saw that little exercise that Melvin did where we wrote the 6 names. That was an example of multitasking. Now, how does this work with projects? Well, what is multitasking? This is the definition we're going to go by today. If you start a task before you've finished another task, you're multitasking. So if halfway through doing something, you have to stop it, start something new, and then come back to that task to finish it, we are multitasking. Does everyone agree on the definition? So here's a scenario. We've got 3 projects of equal length. Each project's going to take about 15 business days or 3 weeks worth of effort to complete. And we've got 1 resource doing this project, each project. So this is a very simple example of just 3 projects that somebody has to roll out. So what tends to happen is that we get this mindset that if we can start projects as soon as possible, we can finish these projects as soon as possible. And on the surface, this seems to be true. Let's have a look at what actually happens. So if these are the days, if we just break it up into 5-day lots, if we start on project A and we do a week on it, and then we go, yeah, good time to start project B now. We go to project B, do another week, and project C. And then we go, all right, we've started everything. This is great. We're going to be able to finish early. Go back to project A, B, C, and we keep rotating this way. So can everyone tell me, or can everyone tell me, whether you type it in or call it out, how many business days is it going to take to finish project A doing it this way? Shout it out or type it in. Get to the notes. Okay, so we've got 40, 35. So project A, yep, 35. 35 is a pretty good guess. That's right. So project A will finish at 35 days. So I'm just drawing the lines there so we're clear. Project B will finish in how many days? Yep, we've got a few votes for 40, correct. And project C, should be obvious. Thank you very much. 45. Okay, 35, 40, and 45. So interesting. 35, 40, and 45. That's an average of 40 business days to finish those 3 projects. That's the average finishing time. Saw an interesting comment there. I remember an IT project I quoted 200 hours, eventually finished at 800. Yeah. All right. Yep. Oh, that was you, Wim. So basically, yes, we've had a few of those in the past. Absolutely had a few of those. So in this example, it's going to take us an average of 40 business days to finish those projects. But what if instead we focused on finishing rather than focused on starting projects as soon as possible? So this time round, we're going to just focus on project A, then focus on project B, and then focus on project C. So again, can you type in the chat, like, how long will it take to finish project A? How many business days? Thank you. Lots of 15s coming through. Yep. Project B. Yep, 30. And project C. 45. Interesting. But hang on a second. We started project B later, and we started project C even later. So this time round, project A finished in 15, B in 30, and C in 45. The average now is 30 business days. Well, how's that possible? We've got the same resource doing the same amount of work. But hang on a second. As you saw with that last little exercise we did with the 6 names, if you put multitasking into the frame, then when you come back to restart a task, it takes at least 20% more time to actually get going. So the reality is the first method would have looked more like this. So really, project A would have finished at day 39, B at 45, and C at 51, if we're more realistic about, starting and stopping. So here's the comparison. The average finish time is really 45 business days, using that first example where we start things as soon as possible. But if we compare the two methods where we focus on finishing rather than focus on starting, it's a huge difference. Same resource, same projects, finish in a third less time. Or you can look at it that if we multitask or we try and jump from one project to another, it literally takes 50% more time in this very simple example. Now, as Melvin pointed out, if you start, pushing things out and getting more complicated, these times blow out by a lot more. So here's the lesson. Focus on finishing, not on starting. So if you start something, finish it first before you go to the next thing. And we'll talk about work in progress like we spoke about earlier. So where to start? How do we do this? How do we focus on finishing? Number one thing you can do, make work visible. I hope that's obvious to people by now. If you cannot see what's going on, then you will not be able to manage it and you will not be able to focus. Obvious thing you can use in your case is obviously top left to do that. Stop starting and start finishing, right? It sounds counterintuitive, but if you sit down and think about it logically, if you delay the start of something, by some magic, it actually can finish earlier. It's about timing. It's about finishing before you start the next thing. And then finally, limit work in progress. Now, for our project team, we limit the whole team, which is 10 people, to 5 projects at a time. So at any given time, there's no more than 5 projects actually up and running. Now, yes, do projects have lags in them and time that is a natural stopping point? Absolutely. So that project would get put aside while we're waiting for something to happen. But then another project may jump in, but we don't have more than 5 running at a time. This number can vary, right? Because it just depends on how big your team is, how many projects you've got on the go. But the point is to always be finishing projects, not starting new ones. So here's an interesting comment. I have to say that never happens because an internal delay, customer delay, vendor delay, etc. 15 days project normally finishes 20 days if we are lucky. Yes, absolutely. So project effort compared to project timeline are 2 different things. But what we're saying basically is if a project's going to take 15 days of project timeline, then you want to be able to finish that as quickly as possible. And we'll work out how to actually finish things quicker in the next few slides. Yeah. So the next topic, how to keep projects in budget and in scope. So here's a question. I'm sure some of you have played the role of maybe actually working on projects, maybe being a project engineer. When somebody asks you, look, we want to quote this project, how long do you think it's going to take you to do this task or this task or this task? Can someone run me through what mindset you go through? How do you estimate time? Can anyone give me an example of how they estimate time? Let's say I said to you, you need to install this server. How do you give a time to somebody that's trying to quote a job? But by the way, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to throw in an answer. Experience, past projects, scoping tools, benchmarks. Okay, nice. Add contingency. Thanks, Jamie. Um, Jamie's hit the nail on the head there. So as engineers or as people quoting things, we tend to go, well, I think this is going to take this long, but I better add some contingency to it as well. Because if I say something's going to take 2 hours and it takes longer, I'm going to look bad. So I might as well say, well, if something's going to take 2 hours, I think it's going to take this much. Therefore, I add some contingency. So here's what I see engineers doing. This is the rule that we go by. The 2 times engineer rule plus the project management buffer rule. So what I've seen engineers do, and I have been an engineer myself, is we think, hang on a second, something's going to take 2 hours. We specify 4 hours for safety. And then the project manager comes along and goes, yeah, we better add some buffer to that in case something goes wrong. So the formula normally looks like this. A 2-hour task ends up being estimated at 2 times 2, that's 4 hours. And then the project manager comes along and goes, hey, we better add 25% to that. So that 2-hour task gets quoted as a 5-hour task. Now, when we actually ran this experiment and asked our engineers how they did it, I can remember one particular engineer sitting in the boardroom at the time, and I could see his brain ticking over. So I stopped the meeting for a second, and I said, Marcus, how do you calculate how much time that you're going to tell us to do each task? And he literally said that out loud. He goes, I think about how long it takes, and I double it. And then every other engineer went, yeah, that's what we do too. So it is typical for people to add safety, add buffer, add contingency, as Jamie said. And project managers love to do that too. So what does this mean? What can we actually do with this? So why do things actually run over time? So given that people estimate and then add contingency, then we add buffer, and it still runs over time. Well, here's the first reason. Student syndrome. Now, I'm sure everybody on this call has been a student at some stage. We've probably all gone to some sort of school. So what's student syndrome? Well, if we're going to prepare a paper that's due at a particular time or study for an exam, when do we tend to start doing that? Let's say that the paper's due in a month's time. You tell me, when are you going to start?
The night before.
The night before. Yes. So basically, this is what we call planned procrastination. Okay. It's like, it's not due for another month. That's cool. Yeah. And I've got a week to go. Yeah, it's okay. I've still got plenty of time. And then the night before, it's, oh, shit. Okay. I've got to get this done. And then we just ram it in at the last minute. So if we do that, what happens is any potential safety margins and buffers that we put in will actually can't be used. We're doing things at the last minute. And then everyone, including the person doing it, obviously, is under pressure. So this is not a good way to work. And this is the way most of us do work. Okay. So that's one thing that causes budget overrun. The next one's Parkinson's law. I'll quickly explain Parkinson's law. It's basically work will expand to fill the time allotted. So if you tell someone, hey, you've got 5 hours to do that task, how long will it take them to do it? I'm actually asking the question. Typically, how long will someone take to do a 5-hour task if you tell them that? 5.5 hours, thank you. So 7.
7,
5 to 6 hours. Right? Does anyone think it's going to take 5? No, it's always going to take a bit longer, right? As a minimum, a bit longer. So why? Because psychologically we know we've got that much time, and then we fill the time, and then something may happen, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that it typically takes more than that time. So if we combine the previous one, which is student syndrome and Parkinson's law, then stuff takes longer than we actually allocate, okay? Here's a third reason projects go over budget over time: gold plating. So basically, gold plating is adding something that's not in scope. Now, if we allocate to an engineer 5 hours to get something done, and by some miracle, Parkinson's law doesn't kick in, and they get it done in 3 hours, guess what happens? Instead of going on to the next thing, they'll go, ooh, I wonder what else I could do here. I wonder how I could improve this. I wonder how I can actually add value here. So they start gold plating. I remember an example in one of the books I read, which was based on Pixar, that did the, what's that movie? Toy Story. Toy Story. So in Toy Story, there's a scene where they pan across the room. And the people doing the graphics, the animation, actually went to the point of detailing DVD covers and put real names and real things on the covers of the DVDs that was sitting on the shelf. Now, when you panned across in that scene, unless you freeze framed and zoomed in, you could not see what was on those DVD covers. But somebody obviously had the time allocated to make those DVD covers accurate. Now, did they add any value? Was that budgeted for? Of course not. So that's an example of gold plating. People will go and do things that are out of scope and unnecessary. Next one. Murphy's Law, also known as shit will happen. So Murphy's Law is basically anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So this is why earlier when everyone suggested how long a 5-hour allocated time period will take is always more than 5 hours, because something will happen. We can't actually predict that everything's going to run smoothly. So we actually can cater for Murphy's Law, believe it or not. And we'll have a look at how to do that. So what do we need to do to keep projects in budget? Right? There's the problems. What are the solutions? Well, basically, if we had 3 different tasks to do, okay, or 3 different projects, whichever way you want to look at it, but let's say the 3 tasks in one project. We have a rule called the 50% rule. So earlier we described that when someone estimates a task, if it's a 2-hour task, they'll bump it out to 4 hours, and then project managers will bump it out to 5 hours. Knowing this in advance, what we do is we take task A and we only allocate 50% of that time to the person to do that job. Same with task B, same with task C. And instead of allowing that buffer of time that was in people's heads when they estimated, instead of giving that to people to do up front, what we basically do is collect all those buffers of time and we put them in what we call a project buffer. So what that looks like is that each task is the actual estimated time, the buffer time. We take all the buffer time and we transfer it into the whole project. Now, what does this mean? Well, if we do task A, or if we allocate task A to be done in 2 hours, what could possibly happen this time around? Same task. What's going to happen if we allocate 2 hours? Parkinson's law will kick in, right? We have 2 hours to do this. Let's get going to do it in 2 hours. Now, what happens if we go over the 2 hours? We can start going into what we call the project buffer. So we start taking time away from the aggregated buffer rather than the buffer that was already allocated to that single task. And what you'll find over time is that running a project this way means that you will be left over with buffer time, or you'll be on time. By doing this simple thing of simply allocating people half the amount of time to get something done, you'll be able to actually run projects on time and in budget. Now, the 50% rule could be different for each person. It could be 60%, it could be 40%. You have to work out how your people are estimating actual time, and then how much you're actually selling a project for to determine, what's the real rule in this case. So, third topic, how to protect your best people from burning out doing projects. Number one thing, find your bottleneck person or persons. Now, does anyone have a team where there's like one person that seems to know more than other people that we all go to? Right? There tends to be a person or a couple of people in each team that are the gurus in the team. And if there's a problem, we can always go to that person. And if there's a difficult project, we can always get that person to do it. But what ends up happening is that person is always overloaded. And if that person's always overloaded, they become your bottleneck. And without spending too much time on bottlenecks, a whole process, system, or in this case, a project, can only go as fast as the person who's the bottleneck. By definition in the name bottleneck, that is the squeeze point. That is as fast as you can go. So step one, identify who your bottleneck person is for each team. So what do you do specifically? Here's an interesting one, what you do. If you have a bottleneck person, remove task deadlines. This again is going to be counterintuitive. If we said to someone, you've got this 5 hours to do something, and you say you've got to get it done by this afternoon, or let's say 5 days, you've got to get it done by next week, you should remove that and actually say, well, you've got this many hours, go for it. Right? Get rid of the actual task deadline. And we apply what we call the Roadrunner rule. Who here has seen the cartoon, The Roadrunner? Can you remember the actual Roadrunner? What speed did the Roadrunner run at during those cartoons? I'll give you a hint. There was 2 speeds. Go ahead, type it in the chat or call it out. What speed or speeds, I gave it away, there's 2, did the Roadrunner run at? No, still and super fast. Stop and full. Darren, thank you. All right, so here we go. Super fast or perfectly still? That is the Roadrunner rule. The Roadrunner didn't do any other speed in that cartoon. What does this mean? If you have a bottleneck resource and they're working on something, let them go for it. As soon as there's something wrong that stops that particular project from running, let's say there's a blocker, and let's say that blocker is going to take half a day to unblock. Intuitively, what we think is, hey, hang on a second, that person's got half a day available to them before they've got to get back on this project. Why don't we put some other work on them to keep the efficiency going? Okay, we all got this thing about utilization, right? We've got to get their utilization up. So what ends up happening? They've got half a day spare. They're waiting on a blocker to be unblocked for them. And you say, why don't you do these 2 or 3 tickets in the meantime? What happens when you allocate those 2 or 3 tickets? What invariably happens?
Yeah.
Chaos.
Thank you, chaos. Okay, whoever called that chaos is spot on. So in other words, that bottleneck resource, they've got half a day spare, but I guarantee you those 2 or 3 tickets are going to drag on more than that half a day. And by the time they get back to that project, a day and a half, 2 days has passed. So what I'm suggesting, or what I'm telling you works, is that as soon as that bottleneck resource has nothing to do, and they are genuinely waiting on a project to restart, that they are the main resource on, and they're the only ones that can do that. And if it's a relatively short period of time compared to the project, then get them to do nothing. If you just told them to go to the pub, well, maybe not during the day, but maybe you told them to go and have a coffee and just relax for that half a day, then what can they do as soon as that project is unblocked? They're immediately available to get going again. So that half a day where you tried to pull efficiency out of will end up killing the project timeline for that particular project. And as you'll find, you'll end up like we used to do. Your projects will be 30, 40, 50, WIMS was 400% over budget, right? It just kills project productivity. This is the hardest rule I find people want to implement. They just have to have people being utilized as much as possible. Full utilization will kill project profitability. I'll repeat this. Full utilization will kill project profitability. So that's the Roadrunner rule. Again, mainly for bottleneck resources. So here's the steps. Find your bottleneck person per project area. You might have different disciplines. Okay, so that's fine. There'll be one per discipline. Optimize the bottleneck person's time. How do we do this? Number one, this is one that should be obvious. Remove work that others can do. So if somebody else can do that work, give it to somebody else. Because by definition, if you take that off the bottleneck resource, the bottleneck person will be able to get more done, and they are your bottleneck. Here's a crazy question. If the bottleneck person can do a task and it takes them 1 hour, and a non-bottleneck person doing the same task takes 2 hours, who should you give that task to? Should you give it to the bottleneck person that takes 1 hour, or the non-bottleneck person that can also do it but takes 2 hours? Give me a vote. Bottleneck or other? What do you think? Feel free to shout it out. No votes, huh? There we go. Here they go. Other. Okay, we're getting lots of other. As bottleneck resource, we'll have many things going on. Spot on. But I've seen even our own engineers go, oh, but such and such can do it quicker. Yeah, but such and such is needed to get this thing finished. Well, the other person actually, whether they do it in 1 or 2 hours, will have no impact on any projects we're doing. They're free to do it and it takes longer. So keep an eye on this thing, because bottleneck people also love to grab things and go, oh, yeah, I can do it. And they just grab it. And you have to go, oh, maybe not. Let's give that to somebody else. Okay. What else can we do? Schedule their time on multiple projects where they're needed. Generally, these bottleneck resources will have skills that you need over multiple projects. So when you're scheduling projects, schedule the projects around that person. Because if you misschedule them and they have to be doing 2 projects at once, guess what happens to those 2 projects? Both will suffer. You're better off delaying the start of a project by a little bit just to fit in that bottleneck person. Why? They can finish what they're doing on this project and then get working on the next project. The whole thing will flow better. Get others involved. So here's a good one. Get others to shadow the bottleneck person. And here's this crazy idea. Document, right? So get other people to learn what the bottleneck person can do that they normally can't do, right? Get stuff out of their brain. And then finally, there's a thing called help desk mode. And what help desk mode is about is, instead of interrupting this bottleneck person, which is generally the person that has all the answers and can do most things, physically schedule time, put time aside once a day, once every 2 days, once a week, whatever you think it is, to actually have them answer questions for everybody. So it's better to grab 15 minutes of their time once a day than interrupt them 10 times a day with 10 different questions. Right? Maybe you do it during a stand-up, maybe you have a special, 10 minutes after a stand-up, but basically stop interrupting the bottleneck resource. Okay? Otherwise, all of your projects are going to keep dragging out. Here's an interesting quote. I'll let you read that and see if you have a chuckle. Yeah, does that sit true for most people, right? Oh, we're 90% of the way through, yeah? And then the rest of the 10% takes the other 90% of the time, right? So we want to avoid this. So in summary, yeah, I'm seeing some yeps, I mean, yeah. How to finish more projects on time. Make work visible. Number 1. I love that slide that we had in the previous presentation where you You could see the person making the coffees, and you could see the person making the bags. You could tell what was going on. You look around the office, you've got no idea what's going on. You need to make work visible, right? So that's Kanban, Kanban, Kanban. Stop starting and start finishing. Limit work in progress. Again, hard to do without visualizing work. And focus on finishing, all right? So those are the 4 things you can do to finish projects on time. How do you keep them in budget and scope? Basically, take all the task buffers and put them into a project buffer instead. Tell people they have less time to do something and they'll get it done in less time. Good old Parkinson's law. Believe it or not, remove task deadlines. So just give people an amount of time. Don't give them a deadline to do that task. You'll be surprised. They will take less time and do it faster because, again, Parkinson's law will not kick in. And then finally, we just saw how to protect your best people from burning out. Optimize the bottleneck person's time, get others involved, and turn on help desk mode so they're not interrupted. So we did all of this. It took us a long time to get here, right? This was not a 1-week project. This was not a 6-month project. This was a couple of years of study, talking to consultants. I've found the best people in the world that were doing this sort of stuff. I actually interviewed them. I went and saw them. Luckily, a couple were in Australia, so that was handy for me. I didn't have to go all over the world. And after doing that, our projects went from averaging 130% after 6 months down to 71.6%, which is an improvement of 58.4%, almost 60%. So these things work. They did take time. I'm telling you, it took 6 months to implement, right? A couple of years to come up with this stuff. But then after 6 months, this is what we're averaging. Now, today, we're doing slightly different figures again, and there are a few additional techniques for larger projects that I mentioned earlier. So, thank you very much. I think we've got a little bit of time left for questions and discussion, if you'd like to do some now before the next session. Please fire away with questions. I didn't see any specific ones in the chat. And again, feel free to turn on your microphone and shout out the question.
Do you have any advice for smaller companies that don't necessarily have, we have people wearing multiple hats. So I guess if our bottleneck person is our only person, I mean, I guess, yeah, trying to get somebody else to figure out how to also become that person, or any other advice?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. Have someone shadow them, because if they're the only person and they wear multiple hats, then there's no room for growth, number one, right? So they're always going to be your bottleneck. Number two, the thing you could do if you're going to stay that size, or if you've got no choice but to stay that size for now, is to simply get them to focus on finishing, right? Somehow schedule their time so that they're working on one thing at a time, and somehow remove the distractions and the interruptions as much as possible. So it's not about adding things for them to do, it's about taking away. So you'll get more value from subtracting here than changing anything. Does that make sense? Take things away from them.
Yes.
Is there a follow-up question on that?
I think it's just more of an internal, how do we do that kind of question I have now, I guess.
Yeah. So the
Thanks.
how is by observation, because if you can't see what's happening, you can't change it. So observation is taking a baseline. And this is something that business coaches of ours got us to do years and years ago. They got us to write down everything we do in 5-minute increments in a week, and then add up all the different things that we were doing and figure out where we were wasting time, doing things we shouldn't do, doing things we could hand to other people. So my suggestion is, I'm sure you will not be able to get this person to do 5-minute increments.
Yeah.
There's no way. But you could analyze a week of their time and go, well, what did they work on? What happened? And then change one thing at a time. Okay. It might
Yeah.
be, look, we don't know any engineers that don't do their tickets in time, do we? Right? They all do their tickets in time. So it might be instead of them trying to do all their tickets on a Friday night just to submit them in time, it might be you simply schedule 5 minutes at the end of the day that all they do is update their ticket. Why? Because then you'll know what they're doing, right? And then you can manage that person day to day, as an example. So pick one problem, fix one problem at a time, is my suggestion.
That's helpful. Thank you.
No worries.
I've got a
Anyone
question around the 50% rule.
Yep.
So you mentioned 50% and you take the rest of that into the project buffer. When you are allocating the task to the engineer, I'm assuming that you're only telling them that they have 50% of the time to that task, right? So half of what was probably expected to do that task, doesn't that end up putting the engineer under some stress about actually having to finish that task in less time than they would have expected? Maybe, looking at previous examples of doing the same kind of task, now suddenly we're telling them, you've got half the time, without really telling them that, hey, just by the way, if you need to tap into it, there is double the time in the project buffer, right? Like, how do we?
There's not double. Go on, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's my concern, right? You tell them suddenly you've got half the time to do something. Is it realistic to expect them to be happy and kind of not get stressed out by something like that?
Yes, there's two reasons for that. You don't sort of allocate a time per task. What I would do is combine a bunch of tasks together. So let's say instead of reading that as task A, read that as a section of the project, right? Which includes 20 tasks. Bundle those tasks and then halve the time. They don't remember and they will not be able to sit there and work out what each task should have taken. They won't. But here's how you communicate it. You say, this stage of the project, you've got 20 hours to get that done, right? And pretend the actual background amount is 50 hours, right? You give them, 40 hours. You give them the 20 hours. And you say, listen, get it done in 20 hours. But if you need more time, and when you're up to sort of 15, 18 hours, give me a bit of a status update. Let me know if you need a little bit more time. That way, you're setting their brain up to do whatever they can to do it in those 20 hours, knowing that they can be given a little more time. That's different than them knowing they've got double the time. So what I'm saying is you hide the individual task durations within a group of tasks, and you communicate it in a way that doesn't stress the person out. It's like, you got this long to do it, but just come back to me with a status report and we'll see if you need a bit more time. Invariably, it's not going to take 40 hours. It's going to take 20, 25, 30, 35. If it takes 40, great, but it's definitely not going to take 45, 50, 60, which is usually where it goes.
Yeah, our typical way that we operate is we have a lot of transparency in the amount of time so that we can understand and we can also track where certain engineers have gone over budget, right?
Yep.
By allotting it all together in this way and not providing them that visibility as well, it makes it also hard for us to go back and assess how well they've performed over a certain number of tasks as well. There's no easy way to now go back and check where can we improve. We bunched a bunch of tasks together and we've given them an amount of time, right?
So I get this question every single time from every project manager that I've had work for us, right? And other people's project managers, by the way. How the hell do we go through back and analyze and make improvements? So let me give you an example. If it took 2 hours to install a server this time, how long is it going to take to install the server next time? Anyone can answer this. If it took 2 hours this time, how long is it going to take to install a server next time?
Assuming everything is exactly the same, 2 or less hours,
Right.
with a bit of experience.
When is everything exactly the same?
Yeah, almost never.
Never. That's right. So trying to improve a system by improving the bits of the system is a, what's the, I don't remember the saying, but you can't do it. You just can't do it because you're sitting there trying to, excuse the French, stuff around with improving 2 hours. That next time will take a random amount of time around 2 hours. It won't take 2 hours because the scenario will be different. You'll have different Murphy's Law kicking in. You'll have different blockers kicking in. You'll have different stuff happen every time. No 2 projects run exactly the same, ever. And no 2 tasks run exactly the same. Unless they're automated one after another, right? That's fine. But I'm saying between projects. So trying to measure that stuff and improving on individual items is not doable. So why do it? Now you're going to say, well, what should I do instead, right? And what you should do instead is find out what the major blockers were in a project, not whether we took 2, 3, or 2.5 hours, because we're never going to be able to repeat that task again the same way. Never. Your biggest task in a project is to look back over it and say, where were we blocked and how can we prevent a similar block in the future? In our case, our biggest blocker is client prerequisites. In other words, we need to install something. There needs to be a firewall change, as an example. 100% of the time, our project is delayed by firewall changes. 100% of the time. Guess what we do? We give the client the prerequisites. We give the client time to do the prerequisites. We go and sit with the client to do the prerequisites. And until that's done, we don't start a project. Why? Because 100% of the time, projects are delayed by prerequisites. So find out what the blockers are in your projects and improve those and stop trying to manage tasks between projects. That's my advice from having done it that way, where we used to manage each task and we used to burden our engineers to specify how much time they spend on each task. Crazy game. Doesn't work. I'm happy to be challenged in that, by the way. Please, 5 questions back. So we got rid of...
Thanks for the info. Yeah.
All right. So do set budgets, by the way. Just don't be too granular. Definitely set budgets. Just bigger picture budgets. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, I was curious as to whether or not your team runs like retrospectives.
Yes, good question. Truthfully, we used to. We went over, we had a lull over COVID, and now we're doing it again. And we're finding that the core issues are still the core issues. But as an example, during COVID, we took our eye off the ball a little bit. But basically, we go back and analyze what happened in projects. And lately, we've been sitting with larger customers and having let's call it a non-recorded, everything stays in this room session. And we openly admit to clients, like, this is where we stumbled and what we can do better. And that invites them to openly admit where they stumble and where they could do better. Now, I'm talking about projects where we're dealing with IT departments, et cetera, right? So bigger companies. So I think having one of those either internally, where it's let's call it a safe environment where we're not blaming people for stuff, we're simply learning. And then having one with clients externally, if they're bigger, allows you to take those learnings out. So yeah, we did it in the early days. We stopped doing it in COVID. We're doing it again. So yes.
Thank you.
No worries. Yeah.
You talked right at the start about this team of 10. What's the actual makeup for you guys of that team of 10? What makes it click? And is that a static team, or like, do they just work together constantly on their 5 projects and have a backlog of projects ready to start, or what's that actually look like?
Yeah, we got a strange setup, and this is where Wim mentioned this thing that we call ProOps. If you guys have heard of DevOps, the theory with DevOps, which is now practice for many years, is that people doing development would throw things over the fence to operations. Then operations would have to deal with the problems and then throw it back over the fence to get them fixed by development. We found the same things happens with project and operations, so projects and support. Projects would be done, thrown over the fence to support, and then support would have to deal with the problems. Our team of 10 consists of project engineers and service engineers. And those engineers rotate through. And what that allows us to do is that the person that is implementing something actually gets the fun of supporting it later. So they get to see their own work, if that makes sense. So our team is a mixture of project engineers and BAU, business as usual engineers. And because they can change from, finishing a project to doing service-based stuff and then going back to a project later, having the one Kanban board allows them to it doesn't matter to them. What am I doing the next 2 days? I'm working on projects. What am I doing the next week? I'm working on support stuff. What am I doing the next 3 weeks? I'm working on projects. So that's the makeup of our team. It's made up of different skill levels and obviously people that do both projects and services. Can you do that in a very big environment? No. You're not going to have 100 engineers that rotate. But if you break people down to smaller groups, you can achieve that if that's something useful to you. So that's what we're doing. What do you have a question around that?
I'm just looking at scale. So I don't know if you want to, talk about it, but what sort of project load? What are you looking at in terms of revenue and the amount of hours or projects or that model is sustainable for?
Yeah. So we look at revenue as a factor of throughput, which means obviously how many projects can we finish so that the dollar signs look this large at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with this team, we need to I'll give you a figure. With this team, we need to produce $200,000 worth of work every month.
Okay.
With the minimal utilization, not maximum, minimal utilization. So our job is to get utilization down, not up, by doing more with less, which is lean. And how do we do more with less? Well, that's a bigger topic, okay? Much bigger topic.
Sure.
So, yeah, if for scaling, you can use the usual things where you take learnings and you automate things and you make them a standard process. That's the easiest way to scale. Because if you've got everything standardized on the way you do things, how much training and documentation do you need? Very little.
Not much. Yeah,
not much, right? Yeah.
I want to keep us moving along. These are fantastic questions, and I think there's probably a bunch more that people are itching to get in. We can cover them at the end. So I think we'll take like 4 minutes, and then I'll introduce Todd and get into the next topic. And I think I did speak with Steve and Melvin, and we're willing to stay past the end of the hour as well. If there's more questions, we'll just hang out and see how it goes.